global pandemic has forced society to change how we live our lives from day to day and how we interact with others. Many of us uncomfortable with the mild isolation that we must endure to help fight off this persistent disease. This mild uncomfortableness that we feel is only natural. As humans, we are sociable creatures and crave interaction with one another. However, what would happen if we were denied this basic human need and cast out into the wilderness? Would we be driven to madness, or would we adapt to our new world, surviving the elements in nature? Today on His and Hers History, we delve into the sad and strange topic of true isolation when we cover the wild boys of the wilderness. Hello and welcome to the His and Hers History podcast. I'm your host Aaron and this is my co-host Stephanie.
Hello.
How are you, Steph?
Good.
You're comfortable with your mild isolation?
No.
No, you're struggling?
Struggling.
We'll touch a little bit more on that in a second. Before I begin, if you're new to this podcast, let me catch you up to speed. Each week, one of either myself or Steph bring a historical topic to the podcast, either a person, place or event, and we present said historical topic. The only catch is the host presenting knows all the facts and the host listening knows nothing at all. By doing this, we can have a lighthearted look at the past with genuine reactions, and you guys can laugh along with us as we dissect and potentially ruin history.
Always ruin history.
Always ruining history. That's our number one thing here. So, as I alluded to in my introduction, that we are currently, the world is going through a global pandemic, and
yeah, Australia's a little bit behind now. We've reached the
were
Delta
in front.
variant.
We were in front for a bit there, but now we seem to be behind. Depends which way you
Not
look at it.
behind, just in our eyes. Australia's overachievers when it comes to pandemics, apparently.
Yeah.
We want to get to that zero.
Yeah, we want to get to that magical, impossible probably number. But yeah, like we're talking about being isolated and like friends and family. We're lucky enough we still have our jobs and stuff like that, and we have to just basically stay within 5 kilometres of our home.
And as a first world country, we have like things like Zoom and
yeah, that's right. And
all things
no
to sort of
shortage of food.
communicate.
So things aren't bad, but still you talk to friends and family, and I know speaking to you that some people are uncomfortable with the isolation, not being able to interact with friends and family. And it got me thinking, while I was writing this, I was like, maybe there's some stories of people that have been truly isolated and how has that affected their bodies and minds and stuff like that. So
like for real, like all by themselves.
yeah, because I was thinking about doing castaways, but they're people that have presumably grown up with families and stuff like that. Are you miming the Castaways song?
Yeah.
Castaways.
I sang it last week and I think
No, that's right at the end of the episode.
Did I delete that audio? Because I'm very tone deaf.
No, it was good. I liked it. But yeah, like they've already had interaction growing up. But what happens if you're like from an early age when your mind is like a sponge, you're isolated, that you don't have need to interact or develop language or body language, reading faces? Does your body and mind adapt differently
and
to your surroundings?
Exactly. I'm assuming these wild boys are children.
Yes.
And so as children, it's an important part of your life.
You're impressionable, so you take in your surroundings and things like that. So
absolutely.
I thought it was an interesting topic.
Question, is it just boys?
Oh, naughty. You're teasing me? You'll have to wait and see.
Okay.
Don't be naughty like that. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't
Are you
realize
ready
that was against the rules.
Naughty. Are you ready for the Wild Boy of the Wilderness number 1?
Sure thing.
Okay, we have John of Liege. Our first tale of isolation begins in the country of Belgium and is considered one of the first English language accounts of a feral child, which is another term that they use. I coined the term Wild Boys of the Wilderness because I'm clever. There you go. The boy in question, who was known as John, presumably began his life like any other boy at the time. He had a family and lived in a small community. However, according to accounts in 1644 by Sir Callum Digby, I think it's pronounced,
very well done,
who was a reputable philosopher who spoke to John in his later life. The young boy's life was about to take a drastic turn. At the age of 5, John ran off into the Belgian woods. Very strange, you might think. What would force a child to do that? Children run away sometimes.
Was it a mean old parent?
I'm sure you've run away from your parents.
I did. Have you seen my runaway note?
No, I haven't. But please, after this episode, you're going to have to show me.
Okay. Do you want me to tell the story of it?
No, it's probably a bit too long and sad a tale to tell on the
It's quite funny.
Okay, go on then.
Okay. So I was probably like 7
Yep.
and I think Mum yelled at me for some reason and I was like, F this, I'm going to run away as a 7-year-old. And the year before we'd made these really cute little prep photos with like a pasta photo frame.
Yeah, the macaroni.
You had to make it
borders,
gold.
yep.
And I thought Mum loved it. And so as an extra sort of emotional like blackmail guilt
Oh my
thing,
God.
I wrote my going away note that, dear Mum, you're very mean. I'm leaving this place and never coming back. And I drew a little like stick and bandana.
Wow, quite the artistic type.
On the back.
Very expressive.
And I don't think she ever found it. I came home like 20 minutes later.
That emotional blackmail is very sophisticated for a child.
I know. Very
My
clever.
brother, I never ran away because I was a good boy, but my brother tried to run away once, and I followed him with $10, I think, and said, "I'll give you this if you come back,"
Aren't
or
you
something.
sweet?
And it was at dinner time too, and we were having chops or something, lamb chops, which was my favourite. So I must have loved my brother to go after him. Anyway, this boy, however, escaped into the woods in order to get away from enemy soldiers that had come to ransack the town during a religious war. Seems to be a theme in a lot of our episodes. After a short time, the rest of the fleeing community, including his family, returned to their homes and lives once the danger had passed, but John was nowhere to be found. According to the records, John was terrified beyond reconciliation, which is understandable for a child of his impressionable age.
Yeah, fair enough.
So much so that he refused to return to his family and the community. Now, I put a note here. I'm not sure whether it was known to the family that he was in the woods or if they had no idea he was there, but I'm just going to assume that they had no idea. But either way, John disappeared into the woods for safety for a grand total of, how long do you think?
7 years seems like a pretty reasonable like title to earn a wild
7
child.
years? Try 16 years.
Oh my God. So what does that make him? Like 22?
21.
He was found? 21?
21.
Bad math.
But to me, this act is incredible because I'm pretty sure at the age of 5, I could barely even walk in a straight line, let alone survive by myself in a forest for 16 years. Now, I personally don't know any 5-year-olds, but I've seen them like in parks and things like that. They're running into one another, they're tripping over, they're drooling everywhere. They don't have much of a clue of what they're doing.
That sounds more like toddlers.
No, but like,
5-year-olds.
you've seen preps
Yeah.
like before. Like, they're just before prep. They don't have much of an idea what they're doing. I don't think they could survive in the wilderness, but hey, this boy did. So the fact that he survived was nothing short of a miracle. He was like the Bear Grylls of 5-year-old Belgian children. And I've put a little note here. Kids were built different back then.
Very true.
That's a tough kid.
Very
to
true.
survive
I don't
like
think I could survive out in the wilderness.
as an adult, I don't think I
Yeah,
could
that's
survive.
what I mean.
Incredible. During these 16 years, he managed to survive on roots and wild berries, and even though it wasn't mentioned, he would have had to have survived the elements as well as predators also.
Very
I'm
true.
pretty sure there would have been packs of wolves roaming around the Belgian countryside, because I think there's wolves in Europe, Central Europe.
I don't think there are, Aaron.
You don't think so?
No, there.
I thought there was wolves in
I've-
Central Europe.
I've looked it up. Belgium has no established wolf populations.
Ah, yes, I see, but this was back in the 1600s, so there were.
Although wild wolf pups were born in 2020. So
Maybe they released
Maybe
them
they
into the
had
wild.
some.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Finally, at the age of 21, John was caught trying to steal food from a local farm or trying to take refuge with the farm animals for warmth. Accounts vary on this aspect of the story, so it's a bit vague.
I could imagine, the shelter. Finding shelter would be very tricky. I wonder what he used.
Again,
if it
I
was
don't know how he did it.
caves or-
Who knows? So it was reported he was, and I quote, naked and all overgrown with hair, which sounds on par with what you think he might look like if he's been out in the wilderness for 16 years. It was also, and I quote, he had also, and I quote, quite forgotten the use of all language. He probably had limited language as a 5-year-old to begin with, and then 16 years of not using it would result in a loss of linguistical prowess, one would imagine. As a result of living in the bush for 16 years, it was said that John had developed a dog-like sense of smell that allowed him to sniff out food from a great distance, a useful trait for a loner forest boy.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to sort of. I guess it's like blind people, don't they?
Yeah, your
Sense
body
of smell.
adapts. Yeah.
So I guess his body would have had to adapt to sort of what he needed to survive.
Yeah, that's right. And
I
that's-
also wonder, like, a question popped into my head that probably shouldn't have. He would have gone through puberty with knowing like nothing
that's
about
right.
what was happening to his body.
And that's what I was sort of like thinking about. Like, it's true isolation. There's no, like, here's how you do things. You learn from others, sort of thing. Like, you develop that part of your brain. He wouldn't have had that. Everything he would have apart from what he knew up until being 5 years old, but he probably just had to make a lot of it up himself or just not do it at all. So eventually, after being welcomed back into society, he began to talk again, and his sharp animalistic senses began to dull over time as he no longer required their use. Digby's accounts of John claim that he returned to be basically like all other men, which, as we'll find out in this episode, is rarely the case. Majority of feral children have never been able to fully return to normal life. So in this regard, John of Liege is a rather unique case.
Not something I would have predicted.
Yeah, so obviously that 5 years he had with his family in the community was enough that even after 16 years and not interacting with people, he was able to come back and sort of reform into society, rejoin
And do you
society.
know anything about what happened after that? Sort of what sort of life did he lead? Did he marry? Did he have a family?
It didn't say, but according to this Digby guy who did like interviews with him, obviously, he just became sort of like a normal member of the community. He just had this weird start to the first, not the first, but a 16-year period of his life was just really strange. I'm sure there would have been some lingering effects like into adulthood, but it wasn't spoken about. Wild boy number 2, Peter, the wild boy. Not much is known of the origins of Peter the wild boy. He was found in the summer of 1725 in a northern German forest near the town of Hamelin, I think it's pronounced. That's the town that features in the tale of the Pied Piper,
Oh, I
which
didn't know that.
found interesting. He was fully naked at the time and was said to be mute and approximately 12 years of age. It's not known how he came to be alone in the wilderness, but those close to him at the time suggested that he may have been abandoned long ago by his parents, who had fallen on hard times, or perhaps because of a supposed disorder that he suffered from, which we will touch on later. The boy was brought before King George I, King of England, of course, presumably for the form of entertainment.
Yeah, I was going to say, was he sort of like a circus act?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It didn't say, but
Going all the way to England.
I'm presuming for entertainment or for observation. But the king took a liking to the boy and his strange behaviour, so had him shipped to his court where he was christened Peter. So that's weird. They find this little boy in the wilderness, and they went, look at this guy, to the king. We found him in the bush, and the king was like, amusing, come with me.
Bring him to my castle.
Yeah, very strange. And then he gave him the name Peter. He was basically kept as a pet for the king's pleasure, and he was trotted out and put on display to entertain royal guests, as he was seen as a major attraction. Those that did visit and had the opportunity to gaze upon the wild boy were fascinated by his preference to run round on all fours instead of 2 legs, and were amused by his disregard for table manners and other royal formalities. Some of his party tricks included pickpocketing partygoers and trying to kiss the ladies of the court. Attempts were made to try and civilise Peter, but they inevitably failed, as Peter never learnt to speak and would prefer to sleep on the floor rather than his provided bed.
He's a bit of a rascal.
He just clearly didn't understand like social norms and things like that, which is understandable. Eventually, after the novelty of being the wild boy had worn off and the royal dignitaries had turned their attention to the next source of entertainment, Peter was sent to the countryside where he lived out the rest of his days before dying in 1785 at approximately the age of 70. It's nice to see that he was somewhat looked after and lived a relatively long life. Now, when he was sent to the country, it didn't actually say who with or what he was doing, but he lived to be 70, so he had some kind of life, it would seem.
I hope they looked after him.
Yeah, I don't know. They used him as kind of like a pet, but they sort of like fed him and dressed him and stuff, so it's kind of a weird situation. It was presumed at the time when Peter was found that his behaviour was solely as a result of living alone in the wilderness for years. However, some researchers have since come to the conclusion that Peter had suffered from Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, which is a rare neurological disorder characterised by learning disabilities and the inability to develop speech, which would explain some of his behaviour. Some of these beliefs also stem from a portrait of the wild boy Peter, which you could probably look up now if you like, Steph.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Is it the one where he's a boy?
Yes. He's got curly hair.
Interesting features, yeah.
Yeah, in which this portrait he is short, has short stature, has thick curly hair, hooded eyelids, Cupid's bow mouth, which is a pronounced curve to the upper lip, and he had a dislike for clothes and a dislike for being touched by other people. He was forced to wear a little green top every day, which he would try and wrestle free from, which displayed like he didn't like things touching him.
Yeah.
All of these traits are common with the disorder Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. However, this is all speculation as there is no real way of confirming this. But by the sounds of it, he had a disability of some kind.
Oh my God, that's tragic as well. His gravestone says Peter the Wild Boy.
Well, he didn't really have a name per se, so they just called him Peter, and then, well, we found him in the wild, so the Wild Boy.
Very sad.
They were very literal back then, wasn't it? It was like kings had names. Like I remember in your Portuguese royal episode, there was this like one was called the Fat or the Lazy, one of the kings. They were very literal back then. Anyway, that's the sad story of Peter the Wild Boy. It's a bit concerning.
This is sort of what I'm preparing myself for the rest of the episode to be like.
There are some sad tales in here. The next one, Victor of Avrion. Avrion? I think it's how it's pronounced. Moving countries now to France. The strange tale of Victor begins in the year 1800. A boy around the age of 12 was captured by local hunters wandering the woods near the town of Avrion. Just like our previous two wild boys of the wilderness, he was naked and mute. Victor possessed a large abundance of scars, both new and old, which suggested that he had been exposed to the elements for a number of years. It was said that the locals had sighted the boy several times before in the previous decade, confirming that he had been out in the wilderness for at least a few years. He was taken in by a widower of the local town, but escaped back into the woods. He supposedly escaped 8 times over his life, which leads me to believe that he didn't really want to be with people in the first place. But hey, who am I to say? Maybe just leave him be. But humans being humans, we can't help ourselves. Eventually,
I don't know about that. I think they're just trying to help.
Yeah, no, they probably think they're going to help, but they think that they know best as well. I suppose if you find a naked boy in the forest, you're going to try and help them. Fair enough. Well played.
Thank you.
So eventually he was transported to the school for the deaf, where staff attempted to civilise and teach the boy language and socially acceptable behaviour, which he shunned and refused to accept. He was said to have been ignored. He was said to have ignored human touch. He refused to bathe and would frequently explode into violent outbursts. Those that studied him noted that he had developed a remarkable form of selective hearing. He was able to ignore loud sounds such as a pistol being fired from behind his head, but his ears would perk up at the sound of a walnut cracking, which was one of his favourite foods. And this would have been a handy skill again for a loner forest boy.
What is the benefit of ignoring loud sounds? Like thunder,
but I mean,
I guess, if you're outside. I don't know.
I suppose if you're in the wilderness, it would be handy if he can block out, say, the wind rustling the trees. There's like a storm going on, there's trees rustling, but he could hear like, I don't know, a rustle of like a rabbit or something in 20 metres away. So he had like this crazy form of selecting hearing where he could turn it on and off and hear things he wanted to and not, which would have been that'd be an amazing skill to have, wouldn't it?
Yes,
you would imagine being in the wilderness or not. I'd love that skill.
I think I'd still like to know if there was a gun being fired behind me though.
I mean, obviously, maybe he hadn't grown up with a gun. That's where you know that a gun's dangerous. We know the sound of a gun. If we hear it, we think that's dangerous, so we naturally shy away from it. Whereas he may have grown up in an environment where he doesn't know what a gun is. He doesn't know it's dangerous. So that going off is just a noise. That could be like a tree falling over or something.
Then that's dangerous. You need to hear that.
Listen, wild boys make their own rules, okay?
That's what I'm thinking. Like lightning is loud. If lightning strikes near you and it's dangerous, you're going to need to know where it is.
Maybe he just didn't have the reactions that
they
others
expected,
had.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on.
So after some time, eventually French officials gave up, citing the boy to be an imbecile, and he was left to roam the halls of the school for the deaf until a man by the name of Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard, great name, by the way, who tried his hand at teaching the boy language. Itard gave him the name Victor and had some success in civilising him. He was able to get Victor to bathe, wear clothes, and even show some signs of empathy towards others. However, was unable to get Victor to develop speech. The most Itard could teach the boy over a number of years was to understand some basic questions and commands. Unfortunately, Victor passed away as a result of pneumonia at the age of 40, never uttering a complete sentence. So another bit of a sad tale for that boy. But we're seeing a theme here with apart from the first boy, John, but we know he came from a family environment and like socialised.
We don't know much about the other boys
Yeah,
and
that's
their upbringing and how welcomed they were into their own family. But my question is, and I know limited resources back in these days, but a school for the deaf, when you're trying to get him to talk,
and he's clearly got really good hearing.
Limited resources, I understand.
Yeah.
There's probably limited schools, but probably not the right school for him.
Yeah, I suppose they're about like teaching language in unorthodox ways, I guess.
Also the poor students, if he was like exploding into like these violent outbursts,
fits of rage, yeah,
and they couldn't hear that.
Oh my God, what a
Those
scenario.
poor people.
Someone just minding their own business just gets bashed over the head. That's sad. But yeah, there's a theme here with these wild boys. But there's also this sort of underlying thing there that their bodies are developing in different ways. So like a really hyper accurate sense of smell, selective hearing, stuff like that. So it's interesting that if we're like put out into the environment at a young age, our bodies and minds develop different. We get different skills. So
You have
interesting.
to adapt.
Yeah, and it's easy to see that it's not like we're not that far away from our ancestors in terms of, because they would have had skills like that to survive, I suppose. Our next tale, Dina Sanitchar.
Ooh,
Often
interesting name.
Often referred to as the Wolf Boy. He was discovered in 1867 in the Bulandshahr, I think it's pronounced, district in India, in similar circumstances to the other wild boys in this episode.
Is this Mowgli? Is this what Mowgli's based on?
Shh, naughty, you're teasing me. You may have stumbled across, you may have heard of this one. And if people had heard of this one, I would understand because it's sort of semi-popular.
Part of pop culture now,
yeah,
isn't
that's
it?
right. A group of men were out hunting when they spied what they originally thought was a wild animal sleeping at the mouth of a cave. After many attempts to lure the creature out, they finally were able to coax it out of its hiding place. The men in question were amazed to see that the supposed animal was actually a 6-year-old boy. It is alleged that the boy had survived in the wilderness by running around on all fours and living with a pack of wolves, hence the name Wolf Boy. Now, I put a little side note here. I thought about this a few times during the episode. Why didn't the wolves just eat him? And surely that's the easiest meal the wolves are ever going to get, so just eat the boy.
Yeah,
So-
I wonder what happens. So I think we know from a couple of episodes, animals surprise us.
That's true. And I remember watching a documentary years ago of where a leopard lost its cub and it adopted a baby antelope or something like that and started raising it or something. So it's not
It's probably a very
completely
similar.
implausible,
Yeah.
but it sounds a bit far-fetched. The boy was brought to the Sikandra Mission Orphanage in Agra, where he was given the name Dina Sanitchar. The next several years were spent trying to rehabilitate and civilise the wolf boy, but to no avail. Similar to the other feral boys in this episode, his time in the wild had taken a drastic effect on his ability to learn language. He never learnt to talk and wouldn't take to social norms. He preferred to gnaw on bones and eat raw meat rather than eat the cooked meals that were provided for him. Eventually, however, he passed away in 1895 at a young age. It is believed that his story may have inspired the character Mowgli in the Jungle Book, which you were referring to earlier. So you obviously had a little bit of knowledge about that. In Rudyard Kipling's story, which of course takes place in the jungles of India and features a boy who grows up with wolves and has little to no engagement with the outside world and has of course no interaction with humans. Kipling grew up in India for a short time in his childhood, so it's most likely he heard this story and it helped to influence his writing in later life, which is interesting.
It's
and
just
sad.
reminded me of, you know how the Disney version of the Jungle Book is
Yes,
so
I love
happy.
that. I love that one. It's not happy. It's got some dark themes in
Yeah,
there. But continue.
It features your favourite villain as well.
Yes. Shere Khan the tiger.
The Netflix version of that same story is traumatizing.
It is. Is that the one with Benedict Cumberbatch plays Shere Khan as well?
Yes. Oh,
he's
is it?
epic.
No, I think that's the Disney version.
Either way, the one he plays is
It's
awesome.
the one where the brother dies.
Yeah, that is a bit full on, isn't it?
I don't like
That
it.
came out of nowhere. I think you teared up when that happened.
I turned it off. I did not just tear up.
Yeah,
I
you're
broke
very
into
against that.
sobs and turned it off.
Yeah, very against
I
that.
couldn't finish it.
But anyway, that's another sort of sad one. Again, no background story to his like upbringing and how he came to be in a cave. But again, some different and weird developings within his.
I wonder if his story is a bit happier than the last one, though. He might have experienced some sort of happiness in sort of his own
It's hard to
being
tell.
part of a pack.
It's hard to tell with the information you get provided. It's sort of very basic, so it's hard. You have to sort of infer whether they had a good life or not. So you can't really know.
I also wonder, like, what would have happened if he wasn't rescued as a child when he grew up to be a man? Would the pack have still accepted him?
Oh my God! Would he become the alpha wolf? And then ride the other wolves into battle or something.
Oh, God.
We've gone massively off topic. Okay, on to the next wild boy of the wilderness. Now, this one is a bit different. Caspar Hauser. Our next tale of isolation is a little different, as I mentioned, from the others that we've spoken about today. This sad story took place from the comfort of a family home.
What?
On the 26th of May, 1828, a teenage boy appeared in Nuremberg, Germany. This young man claimed to be Caspar Hauser, someone who had spent the last 13 years confined in a small room. Supposedly, his only possessions were a few wooden toys, and his only interaction with the outside world was a mysterious man who would visit each day to bring him food and water. If you haven't picked up on it yet, the through line for this episode seems to be a repeated form of neglect in these young boys' lives. While it's interesting to note their strange behaviours and how their bodies and minds have adapted in their time of isolation, it's also very, very sad what's happening to these young children, and it's about to get much sadder.
So he wasn't really a wild boy.
Yeah,
he was
different circumstances, but still isolation.
boy.
Yeah. Now, this Caspar Hauser boy had just appeared out of nowhere and only had 2 pieces of evidence to back up his claims. He had in his possession 2 cryptic notes that claimed he had come into the mysterious man's care as a small child, but was never allowed to leave his room, but now seemingly had been set free to pursue a military career. Quite a drastic change for a boy who had lived most of his life in a dark room. The story soon went 1800s viral, and he became famous throughout Europe. Like the other wild boys in this episode, this young man had developed some rather peculiar behaviours. He supposedly possessed remarkable night vision and would become paralysed and frightened when presented with new experiences, which is understandable because he's lived his supposedly majority of his life in a small room. There is no reason not to believe this boy's story, right? Well, there are of course detractors that believe the boy's story was a hoax. Apparently, the haters believed that he had learnt the use of language and the ability to write far too easily, and they also argued that his complexion was not pale enough for someone who had lived the majority of their life in the dark. This boy had far too much vitamin D, the haters believed. This story, much like many feral children, has a rather sad ending. In 1833, Hauser died from a mysterious injury. All evidence suggested that he died from a self-inflicted stab wound to the stomach, so he committed suicide, or quite possibly one of his haters came to finish him off. It's not exactly known, but it's believed he committed suicide by stabbing himself in the stomach.
That's very sad.
But it's a weird like tale, that one, isn't it? It sounds like the people that gave him up didn't want him, and then the people that got him didn't really want him, so they just shut him away. So it's a sad story.
That is sad.
And there's also rumours, although there's obviously no evidence, that he was actually a German royal that had been kept locked in a room because he would be the next one in line. So they locked him away so that no one knew about him and they could continue their reign or whatever. But
there's always those stories. Right. People like the gossip and the rumours.
Yeah, with anything that's several hundred years old, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, don't you?
A pinch of salt?
What did I say?
You said a pinch of salt.
Yeah, a pinch of salt.
Grain of salt. Grain of sand. Oh my God.
I think it's take it with a pinch of salt.
I think you're right.
What are you talking about? Naughty, you teasing me. Okay, now at the top of the episode, I said it was called Wild Boys of the Wilderness.
Yes,
and you
it's
said
not wild.
And you said, is it
not
all about
wilderness.
boys?
Oh.
You implied. Well, no. We have one extra character.
So you're lying to me.
Please forgive me for my pronunciation of this next person.
No, you
Mary
get no forgiveness.
Angelique Memi Leblanc. Could be completely wrong, but that's what I'm going with. I'll call her Mary for the rest of this episode. Now, this episode is entitled Wild Boys of the Wilderness, but we have a feral female of the forest. to cover as well. You
Oh,
like
I
what I've
like
done there?
that alliteration
Yeah,
there.
I thought
Feral female of the forest.
wild boys of the wilderness.
We should
feral
write
female.
a children's storybook called
Maybe I could write a
Feral
poem
Female
about that.
of the Forest.
Yeah, we could. Ooh, ideas. No one steal that.
Copyrighted.
Okay. The mysterious case of the savage girl of Champagne, or Champagan, if you're a fan of Futurama, began in 1731 near the village of Songy. That's a really specific meme that I've just mentioned there that anyone knows. Champagan from Futurama. So yeah, near the village of Songy in France. Locals were stunned when they spotted a wild girl near the forest edge covered in animal skins and a tattered dress and wielding a wooden club.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you find it this
What
this
a
girl,
beast.
This girl's pretty badass. I'm just alluding to what's about to happen.
Oh.
Also, a few things happen. Doesn't matter where you're from or what time period you live in. If you see a wild girl with a club covered in animals' clothing appear at the edge of a forest, that's going to be the craziest thing you've ever going to witness. Like, imagine these French locals like tending to their fields and their bread, and they just turn around and see this savage girl with a wooden club. They wouldn't be like, what is happening right now?
Are you sure she hasn't time travelled from?
Well, you'll have to wait and see.
Oh my God, is there time travel in this episode?
Oh my God, time travel. No. We try and stick as best we can to facts and logic. The locals were eventually able to lure the girl out of the forest and get her close enough to examine her. Accounts vary, but the girl's age ranged from anywhere from 10 to 18 years of age, so they weren't quite sure, probably because she looked so strange.
Yeah.
Locals found that she only communicated through animalistic whoops and squeaks, which would have been terrifying, you would imagine.
I don't know how I would communicate with that.
Hello, little girl, are you lost? Whoop, whoop, whoop. Oh my God, what is happening to you?
It's the first woo girl.
What is happening to... Oh, great, well done. What is happening to you and how can we make it stop? It would have been scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're going, well, speaking of French. Thing is, sorry for the accent. It's
Accents.
been a while since I've done an accent. But like this young girl appears, she looks very strange and she's just like screaming and whooping and stuff. You'd be like, what is happening?
Chirping, did you say?
I said whooping and squeaking,
Squeaking.
but chirping, sure. Why
Sure.
not? Sure. Accents, yeah, really affected me here. So the locals took her in for a time. Again, like with all other instances of feral children we've covered, they tried their best to socialise her and make her more civilised. Now, I've written this note here. Why do humans do that? We've already discussed this. We automatically think that our way of doing things is the best, and we force it upon everything, even our own kind. Why can't we just let things be the way they are? And I was speaking about in your episode last week about how the Mongols took over Baghdad, I think it was. They took over, is that right?
That's right.
And before they even had a look or a read of anything that was there, they just burnt everything. Maybe if you look around and study what's around you, you might learn some things, but immediately it seems like humans like our way is the best way whenever they encounter someone that's a bit different.
You're assuming that the Mongols' way is wrong now. So,
No, but I'm just...
So maybe they had it right.
But that's my point. They think they had it right, but just have a look around. Maybe if they had have read from that library you were speaking about, they might have, that makes a lot of sense. We'll use that in our culture. But no, they burn everything. Anyway, these French people did what everyone else has done in the episode and tried to socialise the girl. So whilst living amongst the French people, they discovered that the young girl was incredibly strong for her size and was even able to kill a local guard dog with her club. So she was not to be messed with, apparently. She preferred to eat meat raw rather than cooked meals, often skinning and biting into the meat of a fresh kill on the very spot.
Lovely.
So she would like hunt things down, kill
Just
them, and instantly start eating them.
First raw diet person.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if there's any health benefits to that, but
apparently there are, but I don't think it's proven.
Yeah, I don't want to take them.
You don't want to try it?
No. Eventually, however, the people again tried to make the young girl conform to society's norms, and in time she began to learn to speak French and was baptised and given her name, Marie. I won't say the rest.
Marie.
And then she was sent to live in a convent.
Of course she was. That's where we put naughty girls.
Again, not naughty girl. Naughty, you killing guard dogs and then eating them. Yeah, she was a bit of a crazy one apparently. It was not until 1765 the full story of her origins emerged. She was being interviewed about her early life and she explained that she had escaped into the forest after being kidnapped and brought back to Europe to be used as a slave worker.
Oh my.
It is believed that she was taken from the Americas as a human slave by the French. This explains her forms of communication, as it was consistent with some Native American tribes and their forms of communication. People of the time believe that she may have been an Inuit, but modern research has suggested that she is most likely a member of the Meskwaki Indians that reside in what is now modern-day Wisconsin. And so ends the tale of the wild boys of the wilderness and the feral female
The
of the forest.
awesome boss lady.
Yeah, she apparently pretty full-on dangerous.
Very
Dangerous.
sad that
All of
they
them
took
have,
her.
yeah. All of them
I
have
expected more of you, French from the 1700s.
Yeah, but they were just being what humans are, and
Horrible.
horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them are horrible. But yeah, what's your thoughts on it? I thought it was interesting. Obviously they're sad stories, but what happens to the human body when at a young age, when you're in that developing sort of stage, how if you're denied certain things, your body develops differently.
Yeah, it
Kind of
is very interesting, but very, very sad.
Yeah, and it sounds like with a few of them there were probably other symptoms at play, and there's obviously forms of neglect as well. Like they probably just threw these kids out because they're like, well, you've got a deficiency or something, which is unfortunate, but that's probably what happened. But it's interesting to see how they developed, and their ability to survive in the wilderness at young age is incredible.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Especially, being able to find shelter and
Just like naked and like the elements like the cold and the heat and stuff like that and predators. It's pretty amazing.
also makes me wonder where else this has happened and if it was documented, because it's all sort of centralised around Europe.
Yeah, these are largely European ones.
But has
'cause
it
that's-
happened other places, and how is it sort of...
Well, I assume that when Europeans went to other countries, like they were talking about Native Americans, or maybe when Europeans came to Australia, they probably saw the native people and thought, oh, they're like isolated and weird, but maybe that's just the way they lived. Might be the way they lived and stuff. So, but it's interesting. Yeah. You enjoyed the episode?
I did. It's very
Good.
sad though.
Yeah, a bit sad, but very interesting nonetheless. Wrap up. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of His and Hers History, as told in the His and Hers History way. If you would like to listen to more episodes, you can find us at our website, hisandhershistory.podbean.com, on the Podbean app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music /Audible, and we even have a YouTube channel if you want to look at a few pictures and stuff.
And Instagram and Twitter.
Oh, yes, Instagram and Twitter. Come and follow us. Come say hi, whatever you want to do. Feel free to like, comment, and follow our podcast on whatever platform suits you. Leave any feedback or ideas that you have for us, because we'd love to know what people like and how we could improve. Don't forget to share with your friends, family, work colleagues, or anyone else that you think might be interested in the podcast. By doing this, we can help build our community and continue to provide you with some entertaining looks back at a variety of historical topics. Now, Steph, as always, do you have your topic for the next week's episode?
We are going to be looking at some women who changed history.
Good, I like that.
They're pretty well known, but they're some of my favourites. I really wanted to cover them.
Well, that's good. And we haven't had many women feature on this episode.
No.
Especially
This
in my
episode,
episode. So
yeah.
I might have to do some female historical figures as well at some stage.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to that. I might know a bit about them then, if that's the case, because if you're quite fond of them, then presumably you've told me about them.
Maybe. Maybe you'll have
We'll
to
have to
find
wait
out.
and see. Well, I look forward to it. I'll see you next week.
Good day.
Bye, everyone. Catch ya.